So I'm here with Rabbi Natan Margalit that I've known for years at Temple Beth Zion, and I've been taking a class with you. Your website is organictorah.org, and I've always found you to be a very interesting person. And as we were chatting about our journeys, me when I was 19 getting sucked into a front group of the Moonies, and you were telling me a little bit about your journey, I thought it would be really interesting to get it on tape, and maybe some people could get some benefit from your life course.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
Mm.
So as we were saying, I grew up in Honolulu, very isolated from the Jewish world, pretty much, and we were from a secular Jewish family. My parents from New York, and intellectuals, university professors, and I kind of felt like I was sort of an ugly duckling growing up in Hawaii, because I was trying to fit in and did quite a good job of fitting in, but it was never quite there. And then when I went to Jewish summer camp in California, I sort of thought, like, well, this is who I am, these are my people, and it really made a deep impression on me, the sense of community and purpose and meaning that I found, when I discovered this really positive Jewish experience. And then when I went to college, I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and it's a very highly intellectual place and quite individualistic and quite cynical, and I really was so like, well, this is not exactly what I was looking for. So it got me to search for Israel programs, and I ended up just going on a tour. I was actually a counselor for a high school tour, and that was really, fine. It was seeing the country for like 3 weeks, but it didn't really get me what I was looking for, that same sense of meaning and community. And then after that, I said, okay, I'm going to go and travel on my own for a little while. And as I was at the bus stop in Jerusalem, I was sort of approached by this guy, a rabbi probably in his 40s, who was wearing black, and said, I later learned that he had a line for everybody. He'd sort of like scope you, who are you, what do you look like? And for me, he had a line. He says, well, do you want to go hear a lecture on Jewish philosophy? Which was interesting. And to other people, he would say, if they look like they're just off the boat from India, he would say, do you want to go hear a Jewish holy man? So this was
right. So that brings up a recruiting technique from the cults, just to say that you want to target the message to the person.
Right.
In the Moonies, we were told to look at, is this person a thinker, a feeler, a doer, or a believer?
Exactly.
And so you would.
So he had exactly that, and so. So he took me to the old city of Jerusalem, where there was this, fairly new at that time. This was back in like 1979, I think, and the Aish Torah yeshiva. And their standard thing was they had the Rosh Yeshiva, who was, a gray-bearded man, probably in his 50s at the time, who would giving his sort of standard lecture. And it was the 49 ways to wisdom, which is actually a real thing. It comes from Pirkei Avot and thing, but his lecture always included the certain elements of sort of like anti-West. And the basic thing was, how do you find happiness? How you can find happiness.
That's chapter 1 of the Moonies' Divine Principle.
Right, so that's it. It's like, how do you find happiness? And he gave it was, I still remember it to this day. It was, interesting, sort of compelling, and he was a very charismatic speaker. And it was, you're not going to find happiness through all these material things and all these things. You find happiness through the good. And it's by doing good that you find happiness. And it was, so there was some very interesting, actual, real good.
And it is true that people do find fulfillment by doing good works.
Right. So there was, there was a piece there that was very attractive, and yet I could see, even at age 19 or 20 or what it was, that there was something, it's like, why is he putting down the West so much? Why is he, why is he like making this either or? But I was still very attracted, and so after that, I was one of the younger guys, who was my age, comes and like becomes my friend and takes me and says, come, let's talk to another rabbi. And I speak to this other rabbi, another, older man who's talking to me, and he right away says, this is the turning point in your life. You know, you can choose this or you can turn away from it, and you know you can.
We did that in the Moonies too, by the way, in the 3-day workshop.
You know what? But his main point was,
it's black
you
and
know,
white. Us
just give
versus
us
them.
just give us a little chance. Just stay for 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Just change your ticket. Stay for 2 weeks and talk to us and argue. You know, it's like we're not doing anything, you know, funny. We're just talking and arguing, and argue with us. And if it makes sense to you, then, you know, makes sense, great. And if it doesn't, then fine.
Hmm.
You know, and
so it wasn't hard sell.
No, it was
kind of, you know, hook your curiosity, and
it was their real, you know, their technique was yeah, let's say, you know, just argue with us, and you know, so
maybe we're wrong. Maybe
right, you know, so yeah, and so right, so on the one hand, but what really actually got me was interesting because these guys, you know, these guys were these black-headed, you know, long beards, and actually in between all these conversations, I saw them davening, you know, praying, and for me this was very powerful because two things. Once my grandfather was an artist. He lived in New York, and he was an artist, and a lot of times he would go down to the Lower East Side and paint these guys that were these Jewish characters. And so in my house growing up in Hawaii, I had these pictures on the wall that were these like bearded Jewish men.
Iconic images.
And all of a sudden they were like come to life.
Right.
And
plus you're in the Holy Land, and
right.
there's a mystique about that.
Right. But what really got me was the way they were praying, which was very powerful to me, because up to that point I was sort of like, well, do I believe in God? Do I don't believe in God? I was kind of saying at that point, well, yeah, I really do believe in God. It's kind of like evolution and the sort of order to the world. There's some kind of like, and it was very abstract. And when I saw these guys, it was like, wow, they're like talking to God. They're, you know, and I said, I guess never really believed in God. If this was, you know, these guys really believe in God. And so it was a very powerful and challenging kind of a thing. But on the other hand, I also, you know, talking to the people was like they didn't believe in evolution. They didn't believe, it was like, so I was very, on the one hand, it was ringing some bells, and then I also had some warning signs, like, this is really alien to me.
And that's one of the things I want to get to later in our conversation, is more about like what advice you have in terms of warning signs. But let's go through a little bit more of your story.
So I tried.
You wound up becoming an ordained rabbi.
Right, exactly, and I did. You know, I did get into that world to a certain extent. So I tried to change my ticket. I was calling and I couldn't change my ticket. But I stayed overnight over there, and then I got up the next morning. I tried again to change my ticket. I couldn't do it. And then I just said, okay, that must be a sign. I'm not doing this, and I'm leaving. And I left. But I left, and as soon as I left, I started shaking inside. I started having this like fear. I'm running away from God. I'm running away from this.
Interesting.
And I went into this downward sort of like panic syndrome kind of a thing. I was just sort of, and I went back to school, I went back to college, and I really had to like, you know, seek help and in terms of like therapy, and go over to the school, you know, counselor and things to try to, because I was just having these anxiety.
So just to interrupt for a second, I have a whole chapter in my latest book, Freedom of Mind, on phobia indoctrination, and whether or not you can remember specific words that were said or just the environment, but the groups that I deal with, helping people get out of these totalistic, you know, controlling groups, one of the most common patterns is the indoctrination of that if you're with us, you're with God.
Right.
And if you leave, you're going into evil, you're going into chaos, you're going into insanity.
And that's the way they set it up. And, you know, it's like the thing is, when I left, it was kind of like the plane ticket was just sort of like it sort of helped me to make that break with it.
Right.
But it was really, I was also feeling like, here are these guys are 50-something years old, they've been doing this their whole life, I'm a 20-year-old kid. What do they mean they're going to like argue with me and like you're going to have like the fair argument? So that was part of it. It was like I sort of saw that I didn't trust these guys. And
So the part of you is critically thinking and saying this doesn't add up,
Right.
analytic thinking, but then they planted that seed in your head that
Right,
made
so-
give you these panic and anxiety
right, so there was
issues.
something, and I
I
realized.
had a similar thing because I went to a 3-day workshop at the Moonies. They pressured me to stay 7 days.
Uh-huh.
I insisted on going home,
Uh-huh.
but then I was home and I was like, but what if
Yeah,
God is summoning me?
right.
And my mom is like, let's go talk to the rabbi, let's go talk to the rabbi. And the rabbi was totally useless.
Right.
The rabbi should have said something like, Steve, I'd never heard of this group before it was the Moonies. That was 74. Never heard of this group, but I tell you, if they're legitimate, they'll be there tomorrow and next week and next
Uh-huh.
month. Let's take a time out and let's do some research.
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
I'll do it with you. Would have changed my life, but he just thought I was interested in Christianity because I was saying, is the Messiah coming? Is the Mashiach coming?
Uh-huh.
And you know, for him, Mashiach, that's
Right.
an abstract idea. This is not
Right.
a human being from Korea
Uh-huh.
with $1 billion.
Right.
But anyway, I'm
Yeah,
sorry to
no, so
interrupt your
that's
story.
no, it's very interesting, very similar thing because I managed to like
Hmm.
take that first step out of it, but they had me on some level. I was like, so I spent 6 months just like reading everything I could on Judaism, talking to everybody I could, about this. I remember the school counselor was very nice, but she was saying, you know, what you really need is like a girlfriend. You need a hug.
You're
You need a
20
hug.
years
Yeah.
old,
You
the
know,
hormones
which
are
was very
happening.
nice, and she was right on some level.
Yeah.
You know, I need to get out of my head and just sort of like, but it was not that helpful because it was not. I really needed to look, and I remember I started at a certain point, really looking for, okay, I can't go there. Like I really don't trust these guys,
Mm-hmm.
and I need to find some way to do this my way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried, and I looked up, I was researching around and I looked up, I saw the University of Judaism, which is a conservative
Mm-hmm.
seminary, and they have just started up at that point in Los Angeles. I said,
Mhm.
well, maybe I'll transfer there. I'll study Judaism right here in America and I'll transfer there. And I remember my father kind of like talked me out of it. I went home for, winter vacation. And he says, well, just why don't you just wait, just you say, like just wait, see how it goes. You can take another semester,
Mhm.
take some religion courses at Reed, and see how that goes. And so, I did that, which was a good idea. And I continued talking to people. And the next thing I did, I spoke with a conservative rabbi in Portland,
Mm-hmm.
who I think was a very smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, why don't you come and be a counselor in my summer camp?
Hmm.
We've got this nice little, it's called, Solomon Schechter,
Mm.
and it was a conservative, sort of Ramah type, but smaller,
Right.
up in Washington State. And says, why don't you do that? And it was really what I needed. I needed to follow this, curiosity about Judaism and God and everything. But I realized at that point, that I didn't trust these guys. I didn't want to go back to that yeshiva. So,
Okay.
I had been caught in the middle. What do I do?
Mm.
And this was like a good small step.
Okay.
And it was a great thing because I saw these people who I had grown up in a, really not even participating in a reform environment and really not doing very much even in that. So when I saw people who were wearing tefillin and who were davening in Hebrew and doing all these things, but they were also normal people. They were also, just involved in normal life, and they believed in science, and they believed,
Right.
they wore normal clothing, and they were involved in politics, and and I was like, wow, okay, there is a way I can start to get into this without having to give up all my beliefs and all the things that
Right.
that ground me in this world.
So I'm going to ask you to speed up just in the interest of time because I know we could talk for hours. Reflect on the idea that maybe there are a bunch of 20-year-olds sitting watching this video.
Yeah, so
And where you were at, where they were at, and kind of, I guess I'm asking you for words of wisdom and advice that you might share.
yeah, one of the things that I noticed about this, that the Baal Tshuva movement that I sort of I joined at a certain point, but at a way that felt comfortable to me. So that was one of the things, like don't, sort of like keep in touch with what feels like you. So I found a place, and eventually went to Pardes, which is, as opposed to these other yeshivot, it's not ultra-orthodox, it's modern orthodox, and it's co-ed. These other ones were all single-sex, and very much about honoring where you're coming from and who you are, and also learning the texts of Judaism. So I was able to go and learn all this stuff without having to give up who I was, and that was really what I found. But what I really found was my critique of the other these other places was that they were using fear on some level, and the sense of even their claims to a rational argument was based on fear. That they would have these things, which they do now with at the Discovery Seminar and these various things with the Bible codes, and that they'll come in and they'll do these seminars where they'll prove to you that the Torah is right. They'll prove that God must have given the Torah, and the Bible code kind of a thing. It's like, well, look at this, is amazing. All of these things which are hidden in the written Torah, that it must have been actually given by God in this exact form, or else how could they find these amazing things that predict Nazi Germany and predict Rabin's assassination and things like that right into the Torah. And the thing is, like, when you're studying something like that and somebody proves it to you, it's not about what the Torah is saying. Right. It's not about the values of the Torah or anything that really rings an internal bell in you. It's like, oh, that really resonates with me. It's more about, they have just proven to me that God, must have given this, and therefore I must follow it. Doesn't matter what's inside it.
Well, it's more of an ideology, and underneath that, it's just like submit and obey the leaders of this group because they know more than me.
Right, and so, it's really it's interesting because it's using rationality or pseudo rationality as a fear thing. It's not, because once they've sort of proven to you that this must have been God's will to do the Torah, then it's almost like game's over. It's like it doesn't really matter what it says. You've got to follow, and then add into that fear feeds into the whole sense of the conformity, that you've got everybody doing this and everybody's conforming, everybody's dressing this way, everybody's saying the same things.
Right.
So it's based on this real sense of I've got to conform, I've got to do this because they've proven it to me, and you lose your inner compass.
And part of that fear is, don't trust family or friends if they're, asking questions or not agreeing to do as you are told to do. And I've heard from families who say, Steve, my kid's, in a yeshiva, he won't come and visit, we're not kosher enough.
Right. And one of the things that
breaking up families, which to my understanding, shalom babayit,
right, exactly, and that's one of the things that I did learn at Pardes was that, in Judaism there are things like kibud av v'em, respecting your mother and father, and shalom bayit, and things that these are actual really important Jewish values, and even halachically, even in terms of how you interpret Jewish law. You're really allowed within Jewish law. It's part of the Torah to respect your parents, and even to not to break the law if you want to follow kashrut. But you're allowed to make some leniencies when it's a question of respecting your parents. So you're allowed to do some things.
You're allowed to work on Shabbat if you're a doctor, and that's someone.
Well, that's one example, and this is another example. It's a very important mitzvah of respecting your parents, and in order to respect your parents, you're allowed to, do a little bit of more lenient kind of practice when it comes to kashrut. You don't have to uphold all of the highest level. If you hold a level which is a minimal level of kashrut, where that works and you're able to actually visit your parents' home, that's what you should be doing. You should be talking to a rabbi, getting advice and things like that you trust, but you don't have to be cutting yourself off. And if somebody is saying, well, you've got to cut yourself off from your parents, that's a warning sign that
right. Or how about if somebody says, stop taking your medication, You know, you don't need open heart surgery. Drink this, you know, water that's blessed by the Rabbi, that's
Right.
scientifically proven that its molecular structure is changed.
Right.
What do what do you say to anyone who kind of does books on Kabbalah and puts their picture like
Right.
full?
So that
book?
that kind of like magical approach to Kabbalah is really it's not a particularly authentic approach, I think, for our day. That's there are those kind of things in Kabbalah if you search for them, but there are plenty of good teachers of Kabbalah out here who are taking a much more responsible kind of approach to that. And so you can get into Kabbalah at a very deep level without sort of sacrificing your rationality and your brain. You don't have to.
Right. I did an interview with Rabbi Green
Right.
and Eben Leder and Nehemiah Polan about Kabbalah, which was fascinating to me. I'm new.
Right, and that's what,
Understand
that's exactly. I'm kind of like echoing what Art Green often says,
Right.
because I looked at that interview a little bit. That's one of the reasons why Art started publishing popular Kabbalah books, as I'm sure he probably has talked about. He was really
popular
upset.
but scholarly.
Yeah, that
They're
he's
not
very popular
exactly
scholarly.
pop,
Right,
books,
exactly.
because I've read them.
Right, and so he's trying to get into that field to make an alternative to the this very sort of surface level of Kabbalah that's not
Right.
that's a sort of a quick fix surface appeal, but it's not really the deepest level of Kabbalah.
So, tell me a little bit for the video about organic Torah, what you're doing now, and what the movement is, in a sense, away from the ultra-orthodoxy organizations and sects, which I have big problems with, as you know, being a cult
Right.
expert. But what's the future and the evolution of Judaism in the 21st century from your point of view?
Well, I think one of the things that when I say organic Torah, I think that we really have to get away from the either or. And that's one of the, I think, amazing things. There's a lot of disturbing sort of trends that we're seeing. We just saw this, survey that came out with, sort of like disturbing less participation. But the interesting thing about what's going on is that we are now learning that we don't have to have an opposition between science and religion in the same way. That actually science is starting to shift the way of thinking. It used to be science was all about breaking things down, and we're going to stand apart from the world and break things down into their smallest component.
Right.
And when you break things down, you kill them. When you dissect something, it's dead.
Well, you're taking it out of context.
Right, you're taking everything out of context. But actually, science itself and a lot of thinking in our modern world today is actually starting to say, you know what, that's not actually the best way or the only way
Right.
to look at the world. We can actually understand. Ecology has sort of started to teach us, you need to understand things in their context.
Right.
You can understand not only by breaking apart, but by putting together.
Right.
And so we're actually getting to a place where it becomes very understandable to a modern, educated Western mind to say that, you know what, there is this really amazing, almost mystical quality about things, the way they emerge when it's a whole. A whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
And there's amazing, really a sense of spirituality and holiness. Whole is from the same word as holiness.
Oh.
And so there is really a way that Judaism and really all religions and the modern scientific worldview are able to start really integrating now. That are able to say it's not an either or, but we can actually appreciate a deep spirituality and really be able to think about it in modern scientific ways.
Right.
Because science is actually shifting to say, look at the whole, look at the context. And of course Judaism is really right at the forefront of this, because Judaism has always been this very organic organization. We often approach Judaism, from a Western point of view, at first it looked like Judaism is like, what's going on here? It doesn't make any sense. it's like it doesn't start at the beginning, it starts in the middle. You don't give one answer, you give 5 answers. You give, it's like this jumble.
Right.
And that's from this linear sort of perspective that wants to see everything in this logical, linear way.
Right.
Now we're actually saying, even as Western people, that's not the only way we understand things.
Right.
We understand things by seeing how they fit together into whole patterns. And lo and behold, now we look at Judaism and we say, hey, this is actually not a jumble. This is actually an organic organization.
Right.
So that the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash, all of these things that looked like they were just badly edited, we're saying, no, there's actually a deep wisdom in them. When we start looking at them not from this linear point of view, but looking at them like ecosystems.
Right.
We're looking at them the way they fit together in the patterns. And the cool thing about thinking about things in that pattern way is that it accesses a different part of our brain. It's more the right side of the brain, where you're not separating emotion from thinking, where you're actually able to appreciate the beauty and the deep spirituality while thinking very rigorously.
Yeah, now you're talking my language, because when in my work with cult members, I say we have the analytic side of our mind, we have the intuitive side of our mind, we have our heart, we have our gut.
Right.
And we need to think with all of
Right,
that.
exactly. It's beautiful
In a
research coming out
balanced
now
way.
about, we talk about gut, that all this research is coming out that there's so many
You make
neurons
decisions
that we
with
actually
your
do have a
guts.
brain in our gut.
Yeah,
And
it's really true.
so many things are coming out in neuroscience and things that are saying, don't look at trying breaking things down as like, well, it's that cell or it's that synapse. But no, it's actually the way things work together. And that's how I have always learned Torah. That you look at a Mishnah, don't break it down to this, that, but see the whole pattern. And then you're using the side of your brain that looks at beauty and looks at, the way things fit together. And then you get this really internal sense of, this really strikes me. This is touching me in a deep way. And that's what you want to listen to. You want to listen to where it's really both your brain and your heart. And I think we're getting to a place where we can understand Judaism, and Judaism makes sense in the modern world, where the languages are starting to come together, where you don't have to choose between God and nature, but we're seeing, actually they're kind of, they're sort of coming together. That's what organic Torah is about.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So you're talking the language of complex systems theory.
Exactly, yes, exactly. And I think we're coming now in the 21st century with complex systems theory.
And do you happen to know Yanir Bar-Yam by any chance? The physicist Yanir Bar-Yam. Anyway, disclosure, he was my brother-in-law from my first marriage, and he has the New England Complex Systems Institute. And he happens to be modern Orthodox. And
well, I'm very interested. This is the kind of
teaching this very much. Instead of basically giving you a 1-minute summary, instead of linear thinking, A causes B causes C, it's microcosmic, macrocosmic, increasing feedback loops and decreasing feedback loops, identifying all the hubs.
Well, I have to talk with him. I don't know. I have to talk with him. This is the perfect,
fascinating
network thing, because that's exactly the kind of thing that I talk about in organic Torah. We talk about, we've got this big, sort of.
I have his book handy. Here's his. I'm going to plug him. It's called Making Things Work.
Oh, I have to take a look at this. That's great.
I can loan it to you, but it's he's here in Cambridge, and
well, I definitely want to talk with him, because I talk about, I'm working on a book now, and there are all these places where we get stuck in these either or. It's like, well, should I, is it like tribalism or universalism? And if you look at Judaism has never said either or tribalism or universalism. It's like it's a nested system that we talk about in complex systems. It's like, there's just like you have a cell and an organ and a body, you don't have to choose. It's always, the way things always work is that things are like fractals. They go in different levels, just the way you're talking about. So there's so many things where we don't have to choose this either or.
Yeah, it's great. So in summary, as we're winding up, organictorah.org, I can put a little URL for you at the end of this video. Any other thoughts that you might like to share about the the seeker or the family whose young person is questing on a spiritual path and maybe is getting a little too extreme. What do you think?
Well, it's just, I have to, from my own personal experience, you have to honor that seeking, because there are real things to be seeking, and there are real problems with our sort of secular world which leave a vacuum.
Right.
But there are also these real warning signs of like when people are employing these, do it quickly, you've got to make a decision now,
Right.
you've got to, and they start triggering those fear kind of things. You've got to trust me because you don't trust them. It's an either or.
Right.
Those are real warning signs. And that you can find, that you search a little and you take your time, you can find responsible people who can get you deeper into these traditions and these sources of wisdom. They're out there, but you got to like sift through who are the responsible people and who are the people who are like trying to get you.
Right, and we have Hebrew College.edu,
Right.
which is a kind
Right,
of a...
Hebrew College is a wonderful resource, and there are wonderful resources around. Hadar is another place in New York. Pardes is where I went. And it's an Orthodox institution, but it's open, co-ed, and respects people. I also went to a place called Livnot or Libanot, to build and be built, which is another. They want, ultimately they want you to join them and be Orthodox things, but it's a
Right.
very respectful and soft sell. It's not cultish.
Interesting. Before we go, I want to ask one last thing that's been like pushing me in the face recently, and it's referring to the ultra-orthodox sects in New York, the Satmar and some of the other sects, and people leaving them and they're being labeled off the derech. But they're coming out of these closed communities where they don't even speak English, they don't
Right.
even understand how to live, and this heavy shunning to the point where they can't even be with their own children
Right.
inside. Can you say something as a rabbi about what do you think of that
Well, yeah,
representation of Judaism?
I think it's very problematic, because their whole outlook is defensive. Like, we've got to put up these big walls and have things exactly controlled, and everything has to be exactly what the Rabbi say, and like one step outside and you're out.
Right.
And it's a very unhealthy
Yeah,
situation.
the Rebbes are like gurus.
Yeah,
they're like cult leaders in some sense.
they really are, and there are wonderful people within the ultra-orthodox world, and there are
Sure.
wonderful people who are doing great things, and there's great wisdom in that world. But you're right, there are a lot of those folks and groups that are doing it also based on this real sense of fear, and the outside world is evil, and you've got to stay really exactly towing the line.
Right, and one last point, just the resistance I've experienced in the Jewish community to me talking about Jewish cultic types of groups or relationships, even though there have been some very high profile stories in Israel. It's been always my feeling and my strong passion and my values that it's my obligation as a spiritual person to, if I see people being harmed, to speak out about it, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Hindu or Buddhist.
Right. And I think we have to, I think I agree with you, we have to, there are cultish and real cult kind of things, fortunately, within the Jewish world, and you really do have to look at those warning signs. And on the other hand, also there are our people are searching, and there are...
Right, but for example, the people that I'm hearing coming out of some of these ultra-orthodox sects, they don't want to believe, they don't trust, like they're wanting to be atheists because they got so burned spiritually. And obviously I had my own journey, and I came back to Judaism about 15 years ago with Moshe Waldox and our community, because I could relate to what he was teaching, not this Zeus-like
exactly.
fellow.
You want to find people where you relate from your own heart, and it feels like this resonates with your life, and there are deep teachings. I mean, I also, because there's a lot of people who have like a sort of a knee-jerk prejudice because they've been insulted or hurt by contact with an Orthodox world, and I just sort of say, look, the Orthodox world isn't all bad, and they're not all crazy, and there are a lot of wonderful resources there, but you really have to be careful that it's there are some people, as you said, who are abusing it and who are really more cultish. And you really have to sift through.
I actually found out last week that there's an Orthodox gay rabbi.
Yeah, actually, we just had Shabbat with him last week.
You did?
Yeah.
What's his name?
Steve Greenberg.
Really?
Yeah, so he's actually just moved into town.
So I was like, wow, that's new.
Yeah, he's really the first out Orthodox gay rabbi, and wonderful guy, very smart. He has a book he published a few years ago, and there's a film that he was featured really in this field called Trembling Before God, which talks about gay and lesbian folks in the Orthodox world and their struggles. So that's a very important thing. There are a lot of very interesting and thinking people within the Orthodox world who are challenging some of those tendencies that say just shut the doors and put up the walls.
So do you think women will ever chant Torah in Orthodoxy?
Well, they are already doing so in some ways. They're doing it for women's groups and things, and there are a few Orthodox women rabbis, even though they maybe not be public about it.
I see.
And so there are little bits of change.
There is change happening.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe in 50 years we'll all be using iPads to instead of sidurs.
Well, there are already people doing that. You can already see people davening out of their.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Thank you for
It's a
inviting
pleasure
me.
getting to know you. Thanks so much. Check out organictorah.org. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.